They'll be kicking off this morning with Dr. Paul Whiting, who has a very impressive CV. I'll give you a taste of that now. Former senior lecturer at Sydney University, former director of the Evelyn McLaughlin Children's Centre, former president of SPELD of New South Wales, and former national president of AusSPELD, and the founder of the AAIC, the Australasian Association of Irlen Consultants. Without further ado, I'll invite Dr. Paul up to start off this morning. Thank you, Paul.
Because many people really are not conscious at all of Irlen lenses. My original training was as a secondary school English and history teacher, and I taught music as well at high school. And that training, although it was interesting in many ways, it included nothing that I can remember about the children who can't. It was all about those who could. And we thought, when I was teaching, that can't really meant won't. And so they were naughty children and we had to deal with them in some other way. And later on I was training teachers, and owing to the vicissitudes of the education department in those days, I ended up training infants teachers. That's what you do with a high school English and history teacher, isn't it? And it meant how to teach reading, writing, spelling, handwriting, literature, and so on to little children. And eventually, when specialisation became the fashion, I decided I'd specialise in the teaching of reading. And that's when you discover the children who can't, as I did. And the first one I discovered was the girl next door. The girl next door was an extremely lively, loud child, and she couldn't read or spell. And so I volunteered to teach her. After all, I was a teacher trainer, I could do that. And I can tell you, it was hard going, even though I was using a proven method of doing it. I discovered that she was on medication for hyperactivity, and in those days, that medication was not controlled. And so it was recommended by a psychologist to the local GP, and he simply prescribed it, and it went on from there. And if things weren't going so well, they just increased the dose. And so finally I went to the school to talk to the teacher. And as I was talking to the teacher in the staff room, I said to her, "What does the school counsellor think about her?" And a voice from the other side of the room said, "The school counsellor has never heard of her." She turned out she was a nice, quiet child who just sat in the back of the classroom and didn't participate. What a relief for the teacher. No problems. But she wasn't learning anything really at all. So we knew very little about children with learning difficulties, and we certainly were not training our teachers to meet their needs in the classroom. I was lecturing at Sydney Teachers College by that time, and I took leave to spend a year in a primary school teaching children who had difficulties in the basic subjects. I needed to go back and do what I'd been teaching students to do. And the school I went to, the primary school, had just under 2,000 students. So it was an exciting place to be. You could never have a school assembly, for example. I was the lone resource teacher, as they called them in those days, and it was a great reality check as well as a great learning experience. I can tell you a lot about that, but I won't. Out of that, I eventually helped to set up and direct the Children's Centre at the Teachers College. And there we took final year students and paired them with a child who was not succeeding in the classroom, the students were under the supervision of tutors and a lecturer, and their task was to analyse the child's needs, to develop a program to meet those needs, teach the program, and then evaluate the success of the program. And our follow-up research suggested that there were measurable differences in classroom performance because of that kind of treatment. I was also, at that time, Senior Vice President of SPELD, the Specific Learning Difficulties Association, and on our committee was Dr. Christopher Green, who was a very highly regarded paediatrician from the Children's Hospital. And I remember the committee discussing an alternative method of helping these children, and he was very sceptical about it, but he made a very significant comment. He said, "But the fact is, we have embarrassingly little to offer." And that was absolutely true. We had embarrassingly little to offer. We advocated teaching reading and spelling together, We advocated using phonic methods in the face of the prevailing fashion of psycholinguistic or whole language reading teaching. That was the method that had captured the imagination of teachers at the time. But the children I'm talking about had pretty predictable profiles. They were from all kinds of families, rich, poor, professional and trades, and like most children, they came to school expecting to learn something. But within a few weeks they began to be unsure about school, and many of them started to dislike it because they sensed that they were falling behind their peers in the basic subjects. And the teachers were very encouraging to them. So they said things like, "You can do it, try harder," or "You can do it, it's easy." And these kids were trying as hard as they could. And it certainly wasn't easy for them. But as they looked around, it looked like it was pretty easy for everybody else. And the teacher said it was easy. So because they were mostly of normal or better intelligence, they soon worked out that it must be them. They must be dumb. And that's the worst thing you can be in school, is to be dumb. It was the fashion at the time for people to believe that children like that were good at other things. And some of them were, but I can tell you many of them were not. Because being unable to do the things associated with literacy, and especially some of the other symptoms that go along with that, often means that you can't do a lot of other things as well. For example, these kids were all supposed to be good at active physical things. I've asked a lot of these children, when they pick up teams to play games, when do you get picked? And so many of them said, last. And you know why you get picked last. And so the playground becomes an unhappy place, as well as the classroom being an unhappy place for these children. And of course there were those who were good at physical sports and could become popular in that way. And then there were those who simply rebelled against the whole situation. I'm working as hard as I can, I'm trying the best I can, and it doesn't work and it's not fair. And because it's not fair, they rebelled against it. They tended to be the boys. The girls tended to be the ones who withdrew and just went quiet, so as not to be noticed. And it's harder to deal with that, actually. But the boys got thrown out of class in those days, and that was great.